Great. So we'd like to now transition to the next presentation, and I'll make this fairly brief, just so we can try to stay a little bit on time. I'll be talking a bit about teaching 4-credit courses on biomedical entrepreneurship. This is my disclosure slide. I don't think I have anything to disclose that would be a conflict in terms of this presentation. The learning objectives are to talk about some of the benefits and challenges and also some techniques that could be helpful for you. Clearly many of us are aware that some of the key benefits of a 4-credit course are that it creates a foundational knowledge and can also be a validation of coursework to potential employers. But there are some really important challenges. And one thing I love about the entrepreneurship space is that we're willing to acknowledge these challenges and try to find solutions. And some of the key challenges I've noticed are around timing. The course may not overlap with the student's entrepreneurial efforts. The material is covered over months when the student might need it at specific times. And the invited presenters, they often have cutting edge discussions, but they might not cover the topic itself broadly and give the student that foundational knowledge. So one thing we've noticed as we reflect on our more than 10 years of teaching entrepreneurship classes here at UPenn is that really a lot of our students are actually undergrads. And many of them are coming from the biomedical engineering program. So if any of you are thinking about having a 4-credit course, building that bridge to biomedical engineering can be extremely valuable. They represent almost 2/3 of our students in our program. We have some master's students and PhD and MD students, but it's typically somewhat of a challenge, especially for the PhD students because of their lab duties. They need to spend hours working at the bench, and taking a class can be a challenge. As I reflect upon my years teaching the class, I have a general sense that a lot of the students I teach are somewhat pre-entrepreneurship. They're curious about the space, but they're not actively involved in doing a startup per se. About 10 to 20% are actually working in a startup. So how can we help students who are potentially pre-entrepreneurship? And I think some key lessons that I'd recommend are really focusing on foundations and core concepts, and providing an overview, but digging into the weeds about advanced therapeutics, et cetera, and so on might not be as helpful per se for the students. I think discussing conflict of interest and overview of IP is really valuable. Many students are really not too familiar with that. And emphasizing critical thinking skills, and that's something we can do really well in the classroom. We can help them understand key concepts like de-risking, ideation, and then also networking. So one thing we encourage our students to do is to network amongst themselves and also with the speakers. So these are ways that when a student leaves the class, they have a sense of a valuable thing they've learned. A couple of pointers I'd like to share with you are that we try to encourage our project teams to look for IP that's drawn from the available IP of a university. We don't limit it to UPenn. They can draw IP from MIT or Georgia Tech or other universities. And many universities have an available technologies website. So you might want to consider rolling that into your class as a way to make it more realistic for the students. In addition, we form teams early in this semester. We used to form teams kind of in the midway point, but then we noticed there was more attrition in the class. About 20 to 30% of the students might lose interest in the class, but by forming the teams very early, it engages the students. We have the students prepare a 9-slide deck pitch, and then we, of course, have traditional events. One fun innovation I'd like to share with you is incorporating Google Drive into the class. So when we start the class now, we set up Google Drive folders for each team, and in that folder, we place a couple of key documents. One of the most fun documents that I've been playing around with lately is a tool called the Grunt Fund Calculator. And it's a nice way to explore equity. And so here, the students basically form teams. They give themselves a market salary. Some students are very generous with their market salary. And then they basically track the hours they work on their project each week. And for me as a teacher, this is a great resource because every week I can log into the folders and I can click through the folders and see which students have are not engaged as much with their team, for example. So there's a couple of students who remain nameless who didn't really do much for about a month, for example, with their team. So I can send a polite email, for example, et cetera. So this is kind of a fun way to track student engagement. And Google Slides has a feature where you can check and see when cells were updated as well. And it makes it even more fun because at the end of the semester, we can see how much equity, sweat equity, a student has accrued on their project. And you can see that some members of the team were a little bit more involved than others for this team, for example. So that's a fun way to make a class a bit more engaging and more kind of realistic. And then another little thing that we've tried in our class, and then I'll try to wrap up in a moment, is to have the project teams also be venture capital teams. So at the end, when they're listening to the pitches from their student colleagues, they decide how they want to invest their $20 million VC fund in the different student presentations. And then I allocate the funds based on the equity ownership from the grunt equity. So the students walk out of the class with monopoly money about how much they earn from their hard efforts. But this allows students to sit on both sides of the table. So just to wrap up, our experience at Penn has been that many 4-credit classes are kind of geared more towards a pre-entrepreneurship stage, and there's some fun opportunities to incorporate some new online resources, especially in a virtual environment, to make the class more engaging. So with that, I'll pause. I went through it rather quickly, but I just would like to try to stay on time if we can. I'll turn it to my colleague, Dr. Gooneratne. Do you mind moderating?
Not at all. So boy, did I love that grunt calculator. I think that's just a brilliant way of doing things. And how do the students react to it?
Yeah, I think they're a bit surprised by the idea of that degree of accountability, but many of them appreciate it because many students have had the experience of being in a class and someone didn't do any work and struggling with how to disclose that, et cetera. And this is a really important lesson to learn for entrepreneurship, because one of the biggest challenges the startup space is the attrition or loss of members because of lack of engagement. And it's rare for a startup to continue on with the same team members that it began with. And so helping them understand how to have objective metrics, to have that discussion around, you know, you're not really doing much work for the startup. Are you really interested in this? You know, maybe this is not the right thing for you. So this class is a safe space for them to learn those negotiating skills.
That's wonderful. Are there any other questions that the audience had? What ideas you might want to put it in there? Oh, let's see. Great class model. The final, or do you share the final pitch deck and analyses with the faculty who develop the technology? Is it more theoretical? Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And that's one of the fun things about linking the projects to IP, because there's usually an inventor of the IP, right? Okay. So we can then encourage the students to engage with that individual. And some respond, some don't, but at least they can make that effort. Sometimes they appreciate it. So, you know, I've been very fortunate to receive 2 NIH Fast Track small business grants. And I was able to work with a Wharton small business class, and the class took one of my ideas as their project and made a pitch deck. And then I was able to use the figures from that pitch deck into the commercialization, the 12-page commercialization plan of a small business grant. So as someone who does it, you know, on both sides of this process, I can see the benefit of engaging with students. So that's a great question. And we do encourage all of our students to connect with the inventor of the IP, yes. So one of the things I found with working with undergrads is that they often are gone after the semester. It's hard to sustain them after the semester is over. Does anyone in the audience or our fearless leader here for this conference have ideas about how to keep students involved? Because they're very engaged when the grade is due, but then once the grades are turned in, you know, sometimes they're not as reliable. Anybody have any ideas, or do you have ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be happy to start, and if anyone has thoughts, please post in the chat. But I think that LinkedIn is a valuable tool in this regard because it allows us to connect with our students and build that sense of community, and that's something we hope to do as well with this event also. But you're right, students do, you know, they're exploring, and we have to embrace that as educators, that in some ways college is like dim sum. Right? It's a rather expensive dim sum, but it's like dim sum. And so you can explore all these different classes and see what you're interested in. But I also feel that we're teaching our students a very important skill, which is innovation, creative thinking, and having milestones and being able to pivot. And so that skill set will be very valuable for them in their future as well. So they might not continue on per se with the startup technology, but the thinking skills they can continue.
And one last question here. Student e-team grants for VentureWell or internal competitions with universities gives them the option to explore their ideas outside of the classroom. That is wonderful.
Yeah, I think Dr. Reuter has a very good point as well. So if there's any way to encourage students, so one of the things that we do, and I'll be very brief here, and then we should probably move on, is that we tell students about other opportunities on campus, about the I-Core program. So we do have a slide saying I-Core is accepting applicants on these days. There's the Penn Biotechnology Consulting Group that's accepting applicants, et cetera. So the class can become an opportunity to share information with students, which they often appreciate.